Have you ever had a neighbor so entitled, so out of control, that they actually called the police on animals? Well, buckle up, because today's story from Reddit's Entitled People thread is one of those jaw-dropping tales where you just can't help but think, did this actually happen? And the best part? The person who tried to stir up trouble ended up facing the consequences herself. Imagine living peacefully on your own property, enjoying the simple life. Maybe you've got a few chickens clucking around, a goat or two, maybe even a miniature donkey that's practically part of the family. Nothing wild, just a quiet, relaxing piece of rural paradise. You mind your business, take care of your animals, and keep to yourself. Pretty ideal, right? But there's always that one person. You know the type. They think they run the neighborhood, even if no one asked them to. They act like they're on some kind of personal mission to enforce rules that no one agreed on. And when things don't go their way, they escalate fast. That's exactly what happened to the person in today's story. It all started when a woman, let's just call her Karen for simplicity, decided she didn't like the idea of someone keeping farm animals on what she thought should be a proper residential street. Never mind that the homeowner had full legal rights to have animals. Never mind that the animals weren't bothering anyone. Karen didn't like it, and that was enough for her to go full-on neighborhood watch mode. She would march past the fence, arms crossed, staring at the animals like they had personally offended her. If a chicken clucked too loud, complaint. If the goat bleated in the morning, another complaint. And the donkey? Well, Karen decided that donkey was a public nuisance. No kidding. At first, the homeowner tried to be polite. You know how it goes. Smile, wave, keep things civil. No one wants drama with their neighbors. But when Karen started leaving passive-aggressive notes in the mailbox and reporting violations to the local homeowners association, things got tense. Still, the homeowner kept their cool. They knew they weren't doing anything wrong. But Karen wasn't satisfied with just complaining. One day, she actually called the police. That's right, she called 911 over farm animals. Can you imagine being the dispatcher taking that call? Yes, officer, there's a donkey, and it's making noises. It would be funny if it weren't so ridiculous. Now, when the police arrived, they expected maybe some sort of disturbance. They found animals calmly grazing, secure fencing, and no signs of mistreatment or neglect. Everything was clean, legal, and totally within zoning laws. In fact, one of the officers even commented on how peaceful the place was. Clearly, there was no issue here, except for Karen. But here's where it gets even more interesting. As the police were wrapping up their visit, Karen wouldn't let it go. She insisted they do something. She demanded that the homeowner be cited or fined. She even started accusing them of operating some kind of illegal farm business. Of course, none of this was true. And then, she did the one thing you should never do in front of law enforcement. She lost her temper. Completely. Witnesses say she started yelling, pacing, and even tried to open the homeowner's gate to gather evidence herself. That's when things took a sharp turn. Trespassing is still a crime, after all, and interfering with a police investigation? Not a great move. The officers tried to calm her down, but she refused to listen. She wouldn't leave the property. She kept ranting about her HOA authority and how people like that shouldn't be allowed to live in the neighborhood. That was all it took. The handcuffs came out, and Karen was taken into custody right there in front of the very animals she claimed were a menace. Now, just pause for a second and think about that. A woman who was so determined to get someone else in trouble ended up being the one escorted away in the back of a police car, all because she couldn't mind her own business. The animals, still chilling in the yard. The homeowner, shocked but relieved. And the neighborhood? Well, let's just say things were a little quieter after that. But what happened next? What did the HOA have to say about this? And did Karen actually face any consequences beyond that one arrest? Let's just say the story doesn't end there. The officers walked up the driveway with calm expressions, but Alex could tell they were already skeptical. They glanced at the fence, scanned the yard, and took in the sight of the animals peacefully going about their day. The chickens were pecking at the ground, the goats lounging in the sun, and Buddy the donkey stood lazily by his favorite tree, wagging his tail. Not exactly the chaos Karen had described on the phone. One of the officers introduced himself and explained why they were there. "We received a report about possible animal neglect and public disturbance," he said, flipping through a small notepad. "We're just here to take a look." Alex kept a straight face, even though inside they were fuming. They nodded and politely invited the officers in, unlocking the gate and offering a full walkthrough of the property. Every animal had food. Every water bowl was clean. There were shaded areas, secure fencing, and not a single sign of mistreatment. It was the definition of responsible ownership. One of the officers even chuckled and said, "Honestly, I've seen worse setups at actual farms." Meanwhile, Karen was standing at the edge of her yard with her arms crossed, watching everything unfold like she was the star of a TV courtroom drama. The way she paced, you'd think she was waiting for someone to be hauled off in cuffs. She even had her phone out, recording the whole thing like it would somehow prove her right. But nothing was going her way. After inspecting the entire property, the officers turned back toward the gate. "Everything looks fine," one of them said to Alex. "Actually, more than fine. Looks like you take great care of these animals." They started wrapping things up, saying it was clearly a false alarm, probably just a misunderstanding. That's when Karen lost it. She stormed down her front lawn, shouting across the street, "Are you kidding me? You're just going to walk away? That donkey screams every morning. It's ruining my life. And the chickens, what about the chickens?" She pointed at Buddy like he was some sort of criminal mastermind. The officers raised their eyebrows but stayed calm. They told her the animals were not in violation of any laws, and that the report didn't match what they saw in person. That wasn't good enough for Karen. She got louder. She kept yelling about how the neighborhood used to be peaceful before Alex moved in, and how she'd spoken to legal experts about private noise ordinances. Then she said something that made everyone pause. "If you won't do your job, I'll do it myself." That was it. The moment she crossed the line, she marched toward the gate, yelling that she was going to gather evidence. One of the officers quickly stepped in her path, telling her she couldn't enter private property. But Karen didn't listen. She tried pushing past, saying she had the right to inspect because she was part of the HOA. The problem was, there was no actual HOA. It had dissolved years ago, and even if it hadn't, she didn't hold any real authority. She'd made it all up. The officer warned her again. "This is trespassing. You need to go back to your property." But Karen kept going, shouting something about citizens' arrest and how the whole block was on her side. She was halfway through the gate when the second officer reached for his radio and calmly called for backup. The moment the handcuffs came out, everything stopped. Karen's face went pale. She tried to argue, saying they were harassing an innocent homeowner, but the officers had had enough. She was told, clearly and firmly, that she was being detained for trespassing and interfering with an investigation. Neighbors started stepping outside. Some had heard the yelling. A few had their phones out, quietly filming the scene. Karen, once a self-declared neighborhood enforcer, was now sitting in the back of a police cruiser, ranting about injustice through a half-cracked window. Alex stood at the gate, stunned, not because they were surprised Karen went this far, but because it had finally ended with someone seeing the full picture. The one where a quiet homeowner just wanted to live in peace, and one angry neighbor simply couldn't let them. The animals, still calm. Buddy let out a soft bray, almost like he was reacting to the drama. The officers couldn't help but laugh at the timing. One of them joked, "Well, looks like the donkey's got better manners than your neighbor." The house sat on a quiet patch of land, just far enough from town to feel peaceful, but close enough to still be part of a neighborhood. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect drama. The property had a wide open yard, a small red barn, and a handmade wooden fence that lined the edges. Inside that fence lived a few farm animals, a couple of goats, some chickens, and a miniature donkey named Buddy who became a local favorite. Kids would wave at him on their way to school. People smiled when they walked by. It was a kind of charming little setup that made the street feel like home. The homeowner, who we'll call Alex, had always dreamed of living this life. After years of saving, they finally bought a home where they could raise animals and grow their own food. It was their peaceful retreat, and everything was done by the book. The animals were legally allowed. The zoning laws supported small livestock on residential land. There were no violations, no problems. At least, not until Karen moved in. Karen arrived like a storm in the spring. She bought the house 2 doors down and made herself known almost immediately. On the surface, she seemed normal, polite, maybe a little stiff, but nothing out of the ordinary. That lasted all of a week. Then she started asking questions. Not the friendly kind. More like, "Do you have a permit for that goat? Or is that animal up to code?" She'd say it with a smile, but her tone had a sharp edge to it. At first, Alex thought maybe she was just curious. New neighbors often are. But it quickly became clear that Karen wasn't just curious. She was on a mission. She didn't like the animals. She didn't like the sounds they made in the morning, or the smell that she claimed drifted down the street, even though no one else noticed. She didn't like the idea that someone was running a farm in her nice suburban neighborhood, even though it wasn't a farm at all. The thing is, this wasn't some perfectly polished suburb with white fences and strict uniformity. It was a mixed neighborhood, with older homes, newer builds, and a variety of people living their lives in different ways. Some people had backyard gardens. Some had tool sheds or boats parked in the driveway. It was a community full of personality and tolerance. But Karen? She brought HOA energy, even though the area didn't technically have a formal HOA with real power. She started by asking around. She questioned neighbors. She even called city code enforcement, hoping to catch Alex in some kind of violation. But every time she tried to stir up trouble, the answer was the same. Nothing wrong here. Everything is permitted. Move along. That didn't stop her. In fact, it only seemed to make her more determined. She began printing out made-up HOA notices and slipping them into people's mailboxes. She claimed she was acting on behalf of the neighborhood council, even though such a council didn't exist. One of her fake notices even threatened fine for excessive animal noise, complete with a signature line that read, "Karen, Neighborhood Representative." Most people laughed it off. Some ignored her completely. But Alex was starting to get concerned. It wasn't just annoying, it was becoming harassment. She would stand at her window with binoculars, writing notes in a little spiral-bound notebook. If a chicken wandered too close to the fence, she'd take pictures. If Buddy brayed in the morning, she'd bang on her window and call it a disturbance. Despite all this, Alex remained calm. They documented everything. Every fake notice, every phone call, every interaction. They contacted the real city zoning office and had written proof that the animals were in full compliance. Still, Karen kept pushing. Then one morning, Alex noticed something odd. A stranger was parked outside the house, sitting in a car with tinted windows, just watching. Karen was standing on her porch, pointing at the yard, talking on the phone. 10 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up. It was the start of something none of them could have predicted. A complaint had been filed. A serious one. Allegations of animal neglect, unsafe conditions, noise disturbances. All from Karen. It wasn't just annoying now. It was serious. And as the officers stepped out of their vehicles and approached the gate, Alex realized this wasn't going to be just another complaint to ignore. This was something bigger. But Buddy the donkey? He just stood there, chewing hay, completely unaware that his peaceful little world was about to become the center of one of the strangest neighborhood battles you'll ever hear. As the police cruiser pulled away, taking Karen with it, the street felt strangely quiet. Neighbors who had come out to witness the spectacle stood on their porches, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some of them waved to Alex. A few even clapped. One older couple across the road gave a thumbs up, like justice had just been served in the most unexpected way. It was surreal. Alex stood there for a while, unsure of what to do next. The adrenaline was still pumping. Buddy the donkey wandered over and leaned against the fence like he could sense something big had just happened. The goats were already back to chewing hay, and the chickens clucked like they hadn't even noticed the chaos. Life for the animals had barely changed. But for Alex, everything felt different. Over the next few days, word spread fast. The neighbors were buzzing. Everyone had known Karen was difficult, but most had just tolerated her antics, until now. With her arrest, the entire street suddenly seemed more united. People who had barely spoken to each other started sharing stories about the note she had left, the way she'd snoop around, or how she made weird claims about being the acting HOA president. One neighbor even admitted that Karen had tried to get their garden shut down for being unsightly. Another said she complained about a teenager's skateboard ramp, calling it a safety hazard. Turns out, Alex hadn't been the only target, just the one who finally stood their ground. The best part? The police didn't just brush it off. Karen was formally charged with trespassing and making a false report. Her mugshot even made a small local blog that sometimes covered neighborhood drama. Nothing serious, but enough to add a layer of public embarrassment that she definitely hadn't expected. She wasn't some hero protecting community standards. She was now the woman who got arrested trying to invade someone's farm-style backyard over a donkey named Buddy. With Karen gone, at least temporarily, the atmosphere around the neighborhood started to shift. Alex noticed more people walking past the fence, smiling, waving, even stopping to chat. A few brought treats for the animals. Someone left a note taped to the gate that read, "Team Buddy." It had a little cartoon donkey drawn in pencil. Alex smiled every time they saw it. And then came the letter. It arrived a week later. A white envelope, typed with no return address. At first, Alex assumed it was another one of Karen's fake HOA threats. But this time it was real. It was from the actual town community liaison office. Apparently, the incident had sparked some internal review. They were aware that Karen had falsely claimed to be part of a non-existent HOA and used that as an excuse to harass multiple homeowners. The letter thanked Alex for their patience and for staying calm during the incident. It also stated that, based on several complaints and Karen's arrest, the town had flagged her address for additional oversight. In simpler terms, they were watching her now, and not in the way she had watched everyone else. But here's where things took an even more unexpected turn. About 2 weeks after the incident, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's house. No announcement, no explanation, just movers packing boxes. By the end of the day, the house was empty. Whether she was evicted, chose to leave on her own, or just couldn't handle the embarrassment, no one really knew. But Karen was gone. Just like that. And something about the air felt lighter, quieter, better. One evening, Alex stood in the backyard, leaning on the fence, watching the sunset behind the barn. Buddy walked up beside them, nudging for a head scratch, his ears flicking lazily. The animals were calm. The sky was orange and soft. For the first time in months, everything truly felt peaceful again. People from the neighborhood began stopping by more regularly. Kids would wave as they passed. Someone brought over fresh egg to trade. Another neighbor asked about starting their own mini garden. What started as one person's quiet dream of living with a few animals had slowly turned into a sort of community hub, something unexpected and beautiful that came out of all the noise. It was never about winning against Karen. It was about protecting the right to live in peace, to follow the rules, and to not be pushed around by someone who thought the loudest voice always wins. Turns out, sometimes all it takes is a little patience, a lot of documentation, and one very relaxed donkey. Time moved on, and things slowly fell into a new rhythm. The animals settled into their usual habits. Buddy still brayed at sunrise, like his own personal alarm clock, and the chickens made their soft clucks throughout the day. It was peaceful, not silent, not perfect, but real. Alex had found what they were looking for when they bought the place, a life that felt calm, grounded, and honest. Without Karen's constant presence, the street began to change in small, meaningful ways. The neighborhood felt more like a community than it ever had before. People waved more often. Some even stopped to chat over the fence while walking their dogs. A few who used to keep to themselves started dropping by, asking about the animals or complimenting the garden. One neighbor even offered to help repair a section of the fence that had started to lean. They said, "We've got to keep Buddy secure," with a smile. Buddy, of course, was loving the attention. He had become something of a local celebrity. A group of kids made a cardboard sign and stuck it in the ground outside the gate. "Donkey Crossing. Watch for Buddy." Someone snapped a picture and posted it online. The post went mildly viral in a local Facebook group, and just like that, people started referring to the house as Buddy's place. Strangers occasionally walked by just to catch a glimpse. Alex was surprised by how many people cared. It was a reminder that sometimes it only takes one person standing up for themselves to inspire others to do the same. Several neighbors shared that they'd always wanted to do more with their own backyards, plant vegetables, raise hens, try composting, but had held back because of how judgmental people like Karen made them feel. Now, With her gone, there was room to breathe. Soon, small changes began appearing across the block. A house down the street put up raised garden beds. Another neighbor installed a little greenhouse. Someone even asked Alex for advice on where to buy baby chicks. It was like the whole neighborhood had been waiting for permission to stop pretending and start living a little more authentically. Even the city got involved in a quiet, supportive way. A council member reached out after hearing about what happened. They wanted to feature Buddy and Alex in a short community video about sustainable living and responsible backyard farming. At first, Alex hesitated. They weren't looking for attention. But after some thought, they agreed. The message was important, that living a little differently doesn't make you a problem. It makes you part of the solution. The video turned out to be a hit. It showed Buddy wagging his tail, the chickens strutting in the yard, and Alex explaining how simple it could be to care for animals in a respectful, legal way. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was real. People from other parts of town reached out to say they felt inspired. A teacher even said she shared it in her classroom during a unit on animal care. Back at home, Alex could finally relax. There were still chores to do, feeding, cleaning, fixing fences when the goats got too playful, but it all felt lighter now. Without Karen's constant interference, those everyday tasks became something close to joyful again. Then one day, Alex found something surprising in the mailbox. A plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "I'm sorry. I didn't handle things well. I let my frustration take over. I hope things are better now." No name, no signature, just a note. But it didn't take much guessing. The handwriting was neat, sharp, a little too controlled. It had to be Karen. Alex read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. They didn't know what to feel exactly. Anger? Relief? It was strange. After everything that had happened, the battles, the yelling, the fake notices, it all ended in a few quiet words on paper. Maybe she had learned something. Maybe not. But that didn't really matter anymore, because life had moved on. The garden kept growing. The animals kept living their best lives. And the neighbors? They kept waving, talking, helping, laughing. It had started with tension, escalated into chaos, and somehow ended with a stronger, more connected street. Not because of the drama, but in spite of it. One crisp morning, the sound of light hooves tapping the ground pulled Alex out of their thoughts. Buddy was at it again, trotting along the edge of the fence as if he had some important place to be. The goats followed behind like little shadows, curious about everything, and the chickens were already busy scratching around the yard. Life had returned to its peaceful rhythm, but it was anything but boring. Alex poured a cup of coffee and leaned on the porch railing, watching the farm come alive. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting a warm orange glow over the trees. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down. Not too long ago, the same yard had been the center of stress and conflict. Now it was a small oasis, humming with calm energy. Across the street, the house that used to belong to Karen still sat empty. A for sale sign stood in the yard, slightly tilted from the wind. No one knew exactly where she had gone or why she left in such a hurry, but few seemed to miss her. The mystery became just another part of the neighborhood lore, something people would mention with a smirk or a shake of the head when walking by. One day, a young couple showed up to tour the place. They parked their car quietly, stepped out, and spent a long time walking around the yard and peeking in the windows. Alex didn't think much of it until a few days later, when a moving truck rolled up again. This time, it felt different. Fresh energy, new faces, new possibilities. The couple introduced themselves the very next morning. Their names were Jordan and Maya, and they were excited to escape city life for something simpler. When they found out about the local neighborhood donkey, they laughed. Jordan said, "We picked the right block." Maya added, "We were hoping to find somewhere quiet, but not *2* quiet, you know?" They had no idea just how quiet it had become, compared to the drama that used to unfold right where they now stood. Over the next few weeks, Jordan and Maya became regulars at the fence line. They brought over scraps for the goats and once even helped herd a curious chicken that had squeezed through a loose board. They asked questions, learned names, and shared stories of their own. Slowly but surely, they settled in, not just into the house, but into the neighborhood itself. More connections formed. A few houses down, a retired teacher named Mr. Lewis began hosting weekend gatherings in his backyard. Nothing big, just lawn chairs, lemonade, and the occasional pie someone would bring over. People started talking more, exchanging small favors, and looking out for one another. It wasn't planned or organized. It just happened, naturally. Alex couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. The fence that once symbolized a vision now felt like a meeting place. The animals, once the source of conflict, had become a bridge, and the neighborhood, once held under Karen's watchful eye, had come alive again with color, noise, and laughter. One day, while refilling the goat's water trough, Alex caught sight of a group of kids gathered near the edge of the yard. They weren't causing trouble, just watching, pointing, laughing as the animals went about their business. Buddy, ever the attention seeker, let out a loud bray that startled one of them. The group burst into giggles. Alex walked over and greeted them. "Want to feed him?" they asked, holding out a few apple slices. The kids nodded eagerly, and one of them whispered, "He's cooler than I thought." Another chimed in, "My mom says this place used to be scary." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Scary?" The kid shrugged. She said there was a mean lady who yelled a lot. Alex smiled, just slightly. "Not anymore." The kid stayed for a bit, feeding Buddy and giggling as he made funny faces with every bite. It was a simple moment, but something about it stuck. These kids didn't know the full story. They hadn't seen the police cars or heard the shouting. All they knew was that this place was safe, fun, and full of life. That was the only version of the story that mattered now. Buddy brayed again, louder this time, as if demanding one last treat before the group left. Alex handed over a slice and patted his neck. "Yeah," they said softly. "You earned it." It was around mid-autumn when the first official invitation arrived. Not a text, not a casual mention over the fence, an actual printed invitation. It was tucked in between the usual junk mail, folded neatly in an envelope with a sunflower design. It read, "Harvest potluck. Everyone's welcome. Saturday at 4 p.m. Bring a dish or just bring yourself." Alex turned it over a few times, smiling. There hadn't been a community event like this in years, if ever. And it didn't say who organized it, but something about the wording made it feel warm, informal, and real. Probably Maya or Jordan, maybe even Mr. Lewis. Either way, it felt like the perfect way to celebrate how far things had come. Saturday arrived crisp and golden. Leaves had started falling in lazy spirals from the trees, and the air carried that familiar scent of wood smoke and dried grass. By the time 4 p.m. rolled around, folding tables had popped up in front yards all down the block. There were crock pots steaming, plates of cookies, bowls of fresh salad, trays of homemade mac and cheese. Someone even brought hot cider and a portable speaker playing old jazz tunes. Alex brought fresh eggs, pickled vegetables from their own garden, and of course, Buddy. Well, not exactly asterisk brought asterisk, more like led him to the edge of the yard and let him hang out near the gate. The neighborhood had unofficially decided Buddy was always invited, whether it was a potluck or not. One kid handed him a carrot like it was a VIP pass. Conversations buzzed. People laughed. They swapped recipes and stories. Neighbors who had once kept their blinds drawn now stood side by side, sharing plates and making plans. And somewhere in between the second helping of apple pie and a discussion about composting, Alex noticed something that made them pause. People were genuinely happy, comfortable, open. Mr. Lewis gave a little speech near the end. Nothing formal. He tapped his glass with a spoon, chuckled when it barely made a sound, and said, "I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't expect to see the street come alive like this. I guess sometimes it just takes the right spark." No one said her name. They didn't have to. Later that evening, as the tables were folded away and the sky shifted from pink to navy blue, a few people lingered. The lights from porches glowed softly, and Buddy made soft snorting sounds as he settled on the ground like he was part of the conversation. A few kids played tag around the edges of the grass, laughter echoing in the dusk. Alex stood next to Maya, both of them sipping cider and watching the street glow under the string lights someone had hung from fence posts. Maya leaned in slightly and said, "You know, This might sound cheesy, but I think this neighborhood needed a buddy more than anyone realized. Alex laughed, nodding. He kind of forced everyone to wake up. The night continued like that, slow, warm, peaceful. And in the days that followed, the energy lingered. People dropped off leftovers at each other's doors. More neighbors started leaving little baskets of produce or baked goods. One person offered to repaint the old community mailbox. It wasn't just about one donkey or one garden anymore. It was about how everything was connected. There was still work to do, of course. Always was. Fences needed mending. Sheds needed patching. And the chickens had developed a sudden obsession with escaping through a loose board that kept needing to be hammered back in. But all of it felt manageable now. There was support. There were helping hands. One morning, Alex found a small rock placed on the front step. It had been painted carefully with tiny sunflowers and the words, "Thank you for staying strong." No note, no name, just a rock. But it meant something, maybe everything, because it wasn't just about surviving Karen's chaos anymore. It was about what grew from it, quietly, patiently, and now very much in full bloom. Buddy let out a soft bray behind them, probably annoyed that breakfast was a few minutes late. Alex turned around and grinned. All right, they said, heading toward the barn. The sky was starting to lighten, birds calling from tree branches. It was just another morning on the street that had learned how to come back to life.